Hi, I'm State Senator Jamie Eldridge. Welcome to another edition of Half Hour on the Hill. My guest today is Rose Saia, the Food Pantry Director for the Center Street Food Pantry and Community Supper, and the former Director for Open Table. And so, Rose, thank you so much for being on the show. And food insecurity, that's not an issue in Massachusetts, right? The economy is going so well. There's no problems, especially in
of course, as rents go up and medical costs go up, we all have enough money for everything in this state. You know,
that is not true.
That is not true. The statistics statewide are that residents in Massachusetts, about 10%, will experience food insecurity during a year. And food insecurity has different classifications. There's kind of two cuts at it. One is if you are in a situation where you are unable to acquire the healthy food that you want, or you're unable to acquire enough of that food. And then severe food insecurity is when your food access is really interrupted and you're going without. And high security is when you can really get the food you need all the time. So
and correct me if I'm wrong, but Middlesex County, the statistics are about the same as far as
that overall in Middlesex County, about 9% of the residents overall, if you look at the whole county, that's the number. So it means that there's some towns that are higher, some are lower. In Acton, it's about 4%, but then you look at a town like Maynard, it's probably closer to 8 or 9%. Marlboro's around 9%. And those numbers don't necessarily reflect the people that don't make the statistic. The people who intermittently are experiencing a job interruption due to illness or injury or unemployment or other factors. So, those numbers are a little deceiving, but that's why there's so many people who seek out food pantries.
And I'll say recently, my staff and I, as we do each year, we do a day of service at the Loaves and Fishes, food pantry, and helping people, providing people a Thanksgiving meal, and just bringing people through in the shopping carts and they're selecting their items. The majority of individuals are working, or they're retired. So this is the working poor, working class that are still not able to make ends meet.
It touches almost every age and every demographic. That said, there are two vulnerable populations. One, of course, is children. And we need to continue to be aggressive at the legislative and the state level to fund things like Breakfast at the Bell and lunch programs and those kinds of things. Food pantries step up during vacation months, as the Center Street Food Pantry does, to provide extra items during those months.
The schools are closed.
Because the schools are closed, and in the summer, Open Table has like a kids bag program with snacks. The other vulnerable population are seniors. And the level of food insecurity in seniors is rising. It's more like 14%.
Biggest demographic increase
growing
in the state.
demographic, and they live with what are called access to daily living restrictions, at least one of them, which makes their ability to get to a food pantry a little more difficult, their ability to prepare meals and find the healthy foods they need at the food pantry due to low salt requirements, low fat, cut up things so they don't have to take a big squash and cut it up themselves. So those are the two vulnerable groups, but then the arc of the rest actually are young people who are trying to deal with rent increases. There's a young woman who's a volunteer that I know who was living in Arlington, and her rent went from $1,000 to $1,500 a month. And she had a job interruption and had to wait to get her SNAP benefits. She came to the food pantry and then took a picture of her refrigerator after she came, and it was arranged. You could see these big gaps, but there were the little items she had received, and she was so grateful for that. But we need to do more. So it's those young people, and then anyone working who experiences an injury, any kind of job interruption.
Any interruption, absolutely.
There was a young woman, a young mother in Maynard whose husband lost his job and the unemployment benefits didn't quite kick in, and she didn't want to say anything to her husband. The cupboards were empty, and she came to the door of Open Table in tears, saying, I know I don't belong here. Well, she did belong there, right? So it just touches so many people.
I know that talking about young people and seniors, recently helped a young woman who was in college at UMass Lowell, highlighting the fact that one of the greatest needs now are literally food pantries at college campuses, which is just so outrageous in this country that there are college students that are starving, that can't afford.
Well, in particular, they're eating bad food.
Sure.
They're not eating, and this is the real challenge for all food pantries, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't have limitless money. We don't have money for. Many food pantries don't have the money to expand, to have the right location, to have enough refrigeration. And the goal here now is to really look at the model of food as health.
Sure.
If we want our students to succeed, if we want our seniors to be healthy, we want them to have fresh food. And so, those who don't come to pantries with that capability are eating subpar, less nutritional foods.
Absolutely.
And that's not right. And this is, I know Boston College is even looking at this issue.
Yeah.
So it's not just state
Right,
universities.
Exactly. Oh,
it's not just community colleges. And as it affects the military.
Sure. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
there are
absolutely.
cadets, there are families who are given a housing allowance, and their meal allowance is really to cover one member of the family.
Yeah, we said that Hanscom Air Force Base, which Open Table did a lot of work
right,
with.
Right, we went there, and in order to acknowledge and celebrate, those people, and there were very large families there that are dealing with hardship with an individual deployed, and while they have a commissary and the foods are at reduced price. If you look at the pay grade of many of our military and the expenses they have, and the fact that those families are coming from other parts of the country to here, where our expenses are so much higher, that's what's driving people to sacrifice food. The food is always last. The housing pricing here in this area, the cost of health care. I remember a woman saying to me that she was choosing her kidney medication over food. This is just a common mantra. So,
and you talk about the food is health model, and
Right.
and so I've we work closely together on sort of upgrading or improving food pantries throughout the district. So over the past I think 5 or 6 years, secured earmarks for Acton Box for a food pantry to expand their operations.
Right.
The mobile food truck at Open Table,
Right,
which is
the refrigerated truck, which allowed them to do that, yeah.
Yep, and then I mentioned Loaves and Fishes earlier, so secured funding for them to expand, and then most recently got an earmark for the Westboro Food Pantry. And a lot of that is, it can't just be the processed food and the macaroni, it also has to be fruits and vegetables, and
Absolutely.
making sure people are
Low
eating
fat,
healthier.
fresh dairy,
Yep.
Good proteins, and I think the kind of partnership and support you've alluded to from the state to the pantries you mentioned is exactly what all the pantries need, because not every organization, which most of them are volunteer run, has the ability to do the kind of fundraising to create enough money to get the kinds of places these pantries need. Many pantries, as Center Street is located in church space, and due to growth is now outgrowing that space. Just like the cost of housing is a lot for residents, it's a lot for food pantries. It's hard to find places that are accessible, that are affordable. So I think a real partnership between the state and potentially a lot of the food pantries to help them get the facilities they need. The Greater Boston Food Bank does offer capacity grants to help with the cost of refrigeration, but more is needed, and, and that help would be quite welcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how I'm just curious how you came to be passionate or got involved with the food insecurity movement, if you will, and your work at these nonprofits.
So I grew up in Boston, and for about between the ages of 7 and 13, my mom was kind of the head of household, and back then there was no SNAP and there were no food pantries. So, I remember times when she would go get that brown bag and open it and try and figure out what to do with what was in there, because it was usually like peanut butter and margarine and, a flour and, not really healthy food. And you never forget that, you never forget being a kid and not having enough, and having only cornflakes for dinner, for example. And I actually got into it here as an adult when I had a restaurant in West Acton. That first year I wanted to give back to the community, and I remembered being that kid who didn't have a great Christmas dinner. So we decided to do 25 meals for the community, and a man named Mike Tobio walked in and said, do you think you could do 50? And I went, he's like, we really could use 50. So I reached out to Karen Collins, who offered to do all the desserts. We came up with 50 meals. And now, you know, I'm part of that organization.
Right, you're the chief cook at the
I'm one of the cooks, and
right.
you know, 100 holiday meals go out, but more important, I cook once a month. We offer supper once a week, and sort of that's how it started, sort of that grassroots need. And Acton Boxbury United Way was a great supporter. They helped fund those meals. You know, and after I closed that restaurant, it led to sort of the work I did with Open Table, which was a great match. So, yeah, it's a mission, for sure.
Can definitely feel that,
Yeah.
And so you're seeing these food pantries transform to, as you said, the food is health model. Certainly, when I visit, you know, food pantries, I'm, you know, picking up constituent requests for mass health or unemployment or housing issues.
Right.
So is there? I mean, what can food pantries do to better serve, you know, people who are coming through the doors, and obviously, what roles should the state play in that? It's a difficult one.
Yeah, it's hard because many of them are volunteer-led.
Yes, I know.
And, you know, they lack the ability to hire staff and be in a location that really would be the kind of a location that would provide those services. You know, if you want to be able to sit with somebody and help them fill out a SNAP application and potentially have that translated into their native language, you need a space to do that, right? So I think the first thing is really looking at the tremendous role that these volunteer organizations have taken on. It's more than just about the food. You know, every organization wants to present that food with dignity and compassion, of course, but there's only so much that volunteers can do. And so, and you know, we try and partner with the social services organizations, town social worker. Some towns, I believe, like Maynard, don't have one. You know, and Council on Aging. You know, it's a rare organization that can really afford to hire the staff to provide the services that people need. But you know, so I think again, that's where potentially a partnership or some kind of support could come from the state. You know, if you don't have the right location and the right facility. I mean, great example at Center Street Food Pantry, our guests have to wait in the hallway. Now, it's not waiting outside, but it doesn't facilitate the ability to have a conversation about those kinds of other services or help the shoppers and the people learn about the other services. You know, there's just no way to do it, so it's difficult.
And you're seeing an increase or
oh my goodness, we're so popular. The growth rate over the last 2 years, for example, at Center Street has been 40%. From where they were, say, in 2016 to, say, the end of 2008. Well, actually, 19 to 17. Those the numbers go up. We get new registrations. I think we had 100 new registrations in September. I saw that in the time I was with Open Table. The growth rate was just enormous, so much so that they changed their service area to be you know, a more limited number of communities. So then what happens? What happens, and where do those people go, especially if they're coming from communities that don't have the same resources? And I think that really pushes food pantries to consider, well, what does it mean? What's your community? You know, both Open Table and Center Street have a community approach. So does Lowe's. You know, they serve their local community and a number around it. But there's so many more that just don't have resources.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about your vision of how to transform that. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back shortly with the next segment on Half Hour on the Hill.
I like to eat apples and bananas. I want to eat apples and bananas. I need to eat apples and bananas. Why can't I eat apples and bananas?
1 in 5 children struggles with hunger in America. Support the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks to help provide meals to those in need. Join us at feedingamerica.org.
Welcome back to the second half of Half Hour on the Hill. Here with Rose Saia, the food pantry director from Center Street Food Pantry in Newton, and very involved in a number of food pantries here in Acton as well, in the Maynard area. Talking about, when most legislators think about support for food pantries, it's all about the MFAP line item, and we've increased that in part because the federal government has cut benefits, and then most recently there's the public charge rule, which will further reduce access to food stamps for tens of thousands of Massachusetts residents, which is truly outrageous. But what else should the state, in your perspective, really get our hands around the crisis? I mean, Massachusetts has one of the strongest economies in the country, and yet talking earlier that the numbers you're seeing at the different food pantries that you volunteer work at, the numbers are rising.
Yeah.
So it's multiple things,
Yeah, I mean, I think my perspective is that, having the MFAP line item increased is always wonderful, and we're grateful for that because it allows certain items, particularly fresh produce, to be distributed to all the pantries at $0. One of the things people don't realize is that small food pantries don't get all their food for free. MFAP is what allows us to get things for free, and we pay for all the other all the other items through the Greater Boston Food Bank. So we're grateful for that. I think my perspective is that it feels like there's a gap between all of the good work that these small volunteer-led organizations are doing, as well as some of the larger organizations like Feeding America and all of the groups like that. There's a gap at the state level, and I don't know that there's a place we could look for support that's like a food security commission or a committee that would be able to look beyond just MFAP to all the factors that affect food insecurity and how we can help people at food pantries get the food they need, meaning be able to get there, get the transportation, and if not get that transportation, how does food get to them? Right? As well as the language barriers. We've got people from, other parts of the world living here. They come into food pantry. They don't speak English. It's hard for them to get the food they need. So I think, I think other than the MFAP line item, it's very tricky for any pantry or any group of us. I mean, many of us see the same issues to have state support. To look at all aspects of what would make it easier and more successful for people to get food and to lower food insecurity, again, particularly for the vulnerable populations of seniors and young people. So, it does feel like we're sort of working without a net. And again, I have to emphasize a lot of these organizations are volunteer-led, so the hours can't be expanded to times when people can get there. So people who need food aren't able to get it. And then, going to the government benefits, anything the state can do to help fill that gap. People are being taken off SNAP benefits because they're deemed ineligible. And the public charge rule, while it is held up in federal injunction, basically now says to somebody who's been here and working, they hit a trough. If you use a cumulative of 5 months of benefits, so if any month you're using child care, SNAP, food assistance, whatever, once you hit that 5 months, you don't get any more. So if you need child care, if you need heat assistance, you're not going to get that SNAP benefit because you don't want to use up all your benefits. You're going to go to a food pantry. And how do we cope with that? As a state? I mean, that can't just all fall on the shoulders. And I think that's why we're seeing this at the food pantries. People are afraid to take SNAP, even if they are eligible, because of public charge. Some people are afraid even that food pantries might count as a public benefit. I think there's more work to do, and I think the local legislators that I've spoken with, whether it be Tammy or Jen or Carmine or Kate Hogan, are all in favor of getting more support at the state level because it is falling on the shoulders of those who are running the pantries and those who so generously donate to them. Right? I mean, there's a lot of great community partners and people, but
and I just think of, I'm helping a couple now that live at the Concordian Motel in Acton, and who finally called me up and said, there's no food in the mini fridge. Can you just give me some money? And a number of organizations responded, positively to connect her to the food pantry, et cetera. But the reality is, she doesn't really have the transportation to get to the food pantry. She doesn't have someone helping her really with the housing search. And so, while eventually we were able to connect her, to getting that support, it's really not going to transform her life. So what are the support services the state are providing? I think of the Crosstown Connect shuttle in Acton, which is, arguably one of the best shuttle systems in the region. However, I think there's probably not, a lot of state support for saying, well, what about people who can't get out of their homes and connecting them to food,
or
bringing them to the food pantry?
At times that they, again, I think there's a real mismatch between the times that food pantries are able to open and when people are able to get there.
Sure,
right?
Yeah.
It's hard to round up the volunteers or open, or even, again, because we are all most of us are acquiring our food from the Greater Boston Food Bank, which means we are driving that wonderful commute that we all know about into Boston, to get food. It can take 2 or 3 hours to get into Boston, pick up the food, and get back here. That's not time and expense a small organization of food pantry can do.
Sure.
Many times a month. And there's capacity limits there as well. So.
And I think to that point, given that, Metro West is seeing a growing, food insecurity crisis, you've got the Worcester Food Bank, you've got the Greater Boston Food Bank, but is it time to be thinking about sort of a Metro West food bank to support all these food pantries?
Yeah, I know the Greater Boston Food Bank is looking at this issue. They do have a once a week pickup. It's called Crosstalk in Framingham on Thursday for some agencies. And then there's a Lowell Food Bank, there's Worcester. They're very limited in what they can distribute because they don't have the space.
Sure.
I think the transportation difficulties that we all know about are exactly what food pantries face and have to consider in looking at expanding their hours. And I think a location that would allow, the 495 corridor, the distances between 128 and 495, say, you can almost see the little chart of north of 90 over to Route 3. There's a real need for that because there's only so many dock spaces available at Greater Boston Food Bank to even get the food.
Sure, yeah.
They can't offer recurring appointments on certain days anymore because they're full.
Yeah, yep.
So it would be an enormous boon to Metro West, to Middlesex County, and even the communities beyond up towards Pepperell, if there were a large bank that, and it doesn't have to be separate from the Greater Boston Food Bank. It could be in partnership. There's something like that exists down the Cape.
Okay,
and it makes a big difference. So it is time for that, and it would get food to more people. It would empower more agencies to
free up
grow.
the staff and volunteers.
It would put less time on the road and more time into service. And more importantly, it allows partnerships to form with local groups. There's Gaining Ground Farm, which grows for the purpose of feeding people and donating to nonprofits. But if you don't have a place to collect that food and distribute that food that's local, you can't do it. So I think it's definitely time for that.
Yeah, and responding to what the local needs are as well. Yep.
Right. It's just space and access. I often, as I drive up Route 2 or I drive on 495, I'm always looking off saying, is that a warehouse that's empty? That has great access. That would be a great place to put something like that. It would make an enormous difference, I think, for the people here.
And I know I do a lot of work with household goods in Acton, and their ability, to have that kind of space. They're serving 250 families or households every month. So having that economies of scale locally and not, in Boston or Western Mass.
Right, and to put it in perspective, Center Street Food Pantry now has 700 households enrolled. They serve 7 communities. Open Table is, when I left, which was mid-year, I think they had 800 or so distinct households they were serving. And if every household's taking home, 60, 75 pounds of food.
Sure.
The math, it adds up really fast. You need space.
Exactly.
And those numbers don't at all match need.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the combination of looking at ways that people who need food can get there,
sure,
improving transportation access, giving food banks the ability to expand their hours by potentially having a local facility so they're able to access food more frequently.
mm-hmm.
And then it just, boils down to money.
Sure.
It's a funding issue, it's wonderful that people want to do community food drives
mm-hmm.
to support agencies, that's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
But as there's growth, the volunteers can't only do so much. So
doesn't fill the gap.
And grants
entirely.
don't cover facilities, they don't
mm-hmm.
cover staff.
Right.
They don't cover transportation mm-hmm. services. So there's just so much more if we really want to get food in people's hands that can be done.
Absolutely. And I would add, as a policymaker, and we've made some progress on things like the minimum wage, but when I go to a community supper or food pantry and the person that works at the local supermarket is there getting his food, that's just outrageous.
There's families with children, it's seniors, it's young people, it's newcomers.
Yep.
Really, if you want to know who's going to a food pantry, just look at whoever's standing in line next to you, anywhere
mm-hmm.
you are,
mm-hmm.
or look in the mirror.
Yeah.
It's us.
Exactly.
It's us. It's not somebody else, and it can be any one of us.
Yep.
At any time. So,
Yeah.
That's where we're at.
I know. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for your drive and passion and continue with this and your suggestions. Rose Saia, it's always a pleasure to see you. And thank you for being on Half Hour on the Hill. Thanks for joining us, and check out our next show.